Ano ai kelohaya kako, pakahia pau, aloha everyone, and welcome this evening to another one of our Talk Story sessions. This is our Kapūkaki Talk Story session. This is actually our part 3. We want to mahalo everyone tuning in. This Talk Story event is being sponsored by Kanaio Kana as well as Kaleo o na ōpio, otherwise known as Kono. If you didn't get a chance, the first part of this Talk Story session, our ōpio got to join Ernie Lau, and listen to his presentation about this water crisis. Last month, we got to sit down with our City Council Chairman, Tommy Waters, who spoke with our ōpio about the work being done at the county level to address this. And now we have a very, very special guest. We are joined by someone who has been at the forefront of this struggle at the national level. And he's gonna be with us and talking stories with our ōpio. And so we are very lucky. Ano ai keloha kako. My name is Kaipo Leopoldino, and I have the pleasure to be your moderator. But without any ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our special guest. U.S. Congressman Kahele represents Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives. Prior to being elected into Congress in 2020, he served 4 years in the Hawaii State Senate. In 2016, he was appointed by Governor Ige to fill the seat of his father, the late Senator Gil Kahele. Congressman Kahele is a graduate of Hilo High School and as well as the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He is the father of 3 daughters, 2 of whom attend Kula Kaiopuni. So please join me in welcoming the Honorable Kaiali Kahele. Aloha e, Congressman. Mahalo nui for joining us.
Aloha ahi kako Kaipo, and mahalo nui loa for having me. And it's great to be here and an exciting time for Lahui. So mahalo nui loa.
So, Congressman, we're just gonna dive right into this. I'd like go ahead and just give you the floor to let us know what you've been doing on the national level, and some things that you'd like to share with the Lehu Lehu, our Kaiaulu, as well as our ōpio that we have here on the panel.
Great. Well, mahalo for having me. It's an honor to be here, especially to follow in the footsteps of Ernie Lau and Honolulu City Council Chair Tommy Waters, who have in all of our different levers or areas of influence have been able to work together on this issue at Kapūkaki at Red Hill. Of course, none other than Ernie Lau, who has been on the forefront of this for years, has been pushing and advocating for the closure of the Red Hill facility. That is not something that Hawaii's congressional delegation at the federal level had entertained in the past, because we had, generally speaking, given the Navy, the benefit of the doubt and the assurances that the Red Hill fuel facility was safe, and that any types of issues that had happened in the past were being remedied, were being corrected. There was an incident in 2014 that resulted in an administrative order of consent between the Department of Health and the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. So every indication was that the Navy, because of this administrative order of consent, the requirement to have a permit by the Department of Health to have this facility there, would be doing the necessary things to protect the water aquifer and to protect the people of the island of Oahu. Clearly, that is not the case. And, the last 4 months have dramatically shifted where the Navy stands on this particular issue, culminating where their decision earlier this week to finally defuel and permanently shut down the facility. For a lot of people, Red Hill was really a mystery, and a matter of fact, up until 1995, had been classified, and many people didn't even know it was even there. This facility began construction before the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. It started construction in the early 1940. Construction finished in 1943, and it was finally declassified in 1995. It was only until the mid to late 1990s were there reports of documents that started to circulate and criticism on the Navy that this facility had been leaking fuel multiple times over its lifespan, those criticisms even became more apparent in the 2000s when there were major issues at the facility. You know, for most people, they didn't even know the facility was there. I was a water land chair in the Hawaii State Senate when I visited Red Hill the first time several years ago. I only had an opportunity to go into the upper shaft and go into one of the tanks that was empty and had been empty for years, tank 19, but had never gone down into the lower shaft at the bottom of the tanks, where most of the piping and the fuel transfer pipelines exist, which has been the source of some of the most recent issues there. But there are 20 tanks that are embedded in the Kapūkaki ridgeline, the Red Hill ridgeline, right next to the Halawa prison. And each of those tanks have the capability to hold about 12 million gallons of fuel. Currently, there are 14 tanks there that have fuel in them. And the other 4 tanks are under maintenance. And then there are 2 tanks. One has been completely taken out of service. That's tank 19. And then the other tank was going to be a prototype for a potential secondary containment. That would be tank 1, that the Navy had hoped to demonstrate a technology that never even existed today, which would be to provide secondary containment for one of these tanks, which the Navy had pledged to do as part of their agreement between the Department of Health and the EPA, but was not able to make that commitment for another almost 25 years until 2045. So no, my office first got a phone call on Saturday, November 20th, indicating to our staff that there was a problem in the Red Hill tank system, that there was an incident that caused a leak of fuel of undetermined quantity at the time. We went actually to the Red Hill facility on November 22nd, 2 days later, for a scheduled visit. It just so happened that 2 days prior this incident happened, and we were assured at that visit that the November 20th incident was secure, and that whatever fuel that did leak was contained. And of course, we would soon find out that that was not the case. Since then, this issue has consumed the entire congressional delegation, my staff for the last 4 months. We have been at the forefront of this issue and pushing and pressing the Navy to be honest and open and transparent with the people of Hawaii, and to ultimately shut down and permanently close the facility, which is what we did about 2 weeks ago when we introduced in Congress federal legislation known as the Red Hill Vi Act to permanently shut down the facility. And in addition to that, make sure that and guarantee that the remediation of the Red Hill underground bulk fuel storage facility was fully remediated, that the Red Hill well was remediated and deemed safe, and that any expenses incurred by the Department of Education or the Board of Water Supply or the Department of Health or the thousands of people that were affected by the consumption of petroleum contaminated water was made whole by the United States Navy. And so, it was welcome news for me on Tuesday when I received a personal phone call from Admiral Aguilino, the commander of the Indo-Pacific Command, informing me that the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Lloyd Austin, who I had personally advocated for his full and complete attention on this issue in early December, that he had made a decision and had given the order to drain the tanks and drain the tanks within 12 months and shut down this facility permanently. And so, that decision, I think, was the culmination of the work of so many people, elected officials, community organizations, neighborhood boards, the Sierra Club, people like Ernie Lau, county, state, and federal elected officials, and the people of Oahu, military service members and their families, civilians in the affected area, concerned people that live on the island of Oahu, all in one collective voice called for the permanent shutdown of this facility. And that is what the Navy is going to do. And so, for me personally, this is something I've been waiting for several months now. And I'm glad the Navy came to that decision. And now it's up to your congressional delegation to hold the Navy to that promise and to make sure that it's done safely. We're talking about well over 100 million gallons of 3 different types of fuel that need to be transferred from that facility and moved into either above ground storage sites or to oilers, ships essentially, that would take that fuel to alternative locations, take that fuel to sea, and make sure it's done safely. I don't want a single drop of fuel coming out of that system while they are transferring the fuel out of there. And so we need to make sure it's done safely. And then oil and gas experts, if they need to be brought in, are brought in to ensure that fuel transfer is done safely, and that we can finally drain the tanks completely and then secure the facility for perpetuity so that it is never used again. That's basically the update on where we are right now, but happy to, Kaipo, hand it back to you and field any questions that people might have, and happy to take them.
So mahalo nui. You did mention about the first time you went and visited the facilities. How many times in total have you visited the facilities, and what was your interaction like with the Navy during these visits?
I think I've been there now about 6 times. I went the very first time several years ago as a state senator. Part of my role as the water land chair in the Hawaii State Senate was to go to this facility because there were concerns from community members about this facility. Like I said, I was only taken into the upper tunnel system and went into one of the tanks. Most people, up until a few months ago, that's all they had ever seen, because to go to the lower tank system takes an elevator and about a little over a 1.5 minute ride to get down there to the bottom and the lower access tunnel. And I had never done that before. Even people like Ernie Lau had never been in the lower access tunnel and had never seen where many of these incidents had occurred. Of course, I went back, like I said, on November 22nd. And then I went back a bunch of, maybe at least another 4 times after the November 22nd site visit. Every time I went back, I looked for different things because, I guess you could say a geek or a policy wonk. Once I get my head wrapped around an issue, I got to read everything, and we print everything and download everything. And I was studying this facility, for hours. And every time I would read something that I needed to understand, I would request a site visit to go there to actually look for these things. On one site visit, I went back to specifically look for an extensive video camera system that I had read about, and I wanted to see if the video camera system was in fact there, and that it was able to show recorded footage of what was happening in the tunnel system. And so I went back to look for those things, specifically for where the cameras were, where they were positioned, how many of them were there. And that's not something I had seen on my previous site visits because I wasn't looking for them. And so there's so much things there that you really gotta focus on what's important and what you're looking for. Otherwise, then you're just being shown, I guess you could say, what the Navy or what the tour guide is there to show you. And on every opportunity that we did go into the tunnel system with the Navy, they answered every question that they were able to, and assured us that they were trying to be as transparent as possible. I think the best site visit I took was one where we did include Ernie Lau. I invited him as well as Kathleen Pahinui of the Board of Water Supply. We also took members of the Board of Water Supply. We took Kahu Cordell Kikoa so he could bless the facility and bless our group before we went in. We took other senior leaders of the legislature on that tour with us. And that was probably the most meaningful tour for me because it gave us a chance to take in people who had an expertise in water, especially how our vai is, feeds the Board of Water Supply and the Navy system and is able to help assess this problem. We also brought in experts from the University of Hawaii that came on that site visit with us. We brought in hydrologists, volcanologists, eco hydrologists. I didn't even know what these names were, but I asked the University of Hawaii, give me the best that you got, and I want them to come with us so that they can help us analyze this. We also took representatives of Oceanit that have expertise in the oil and gas industry and in solving complex problems like this. And granted, this was back in early December. This was months ago. And so, this was right when the crisis was unfolding and starting to happen. And it was really important for me as a member of Congress to get the best advice from multiple sets of eyes so that we could make the best, most well-informed decision. And based on those site visits, it became apparent to me that we needed to shut this facility down, that it had outlived its useful life. 80 years, we should be thankful, that 80 years the military has had this facility there. It has provided fuel that helped us win World War II. But it, over the last 15 or 20 years, has posed major problems for our water system and our water supply, and it has outlived its useful life. And without a significant investment to the tune of billions of dollars and a technology that does not exist today on the planet, there would be no possible way to mitigate, or what I would want to do, which would be to eliminate any risk to the Red Hill, the Kapūkaki aquifer, or the associated aquifers that are very near to this facility. You have the Moanalua aquifer that feeds Moanalua Valley, that's right next door. You have the Halava aquifer and the Halava shaft that feeds a significant amount of the Board of Water Supply's Halava system. You have the Aiea Halava system that is part of the Navy's water supply system. And so it was apparent to me that there was no way to eliminate risk without permanently shutting down the facility. And that is when our staff and office began to draft the VI Act and the bill that was introduced a few weeks ago.
Awesome, mahalo nui. I know we do have some questions online, but while we extrapolate those questions, why don't I introduce these intellectual ōpio that we have on our panel. I'd like to first introduce you to Hema Watson. Hema Watson is a haumana at Halau Kumana. We also have Kainoa Azama. Kainoa attends the University of Hawaii at Manoa. We have Lillian Nahoy. She is a haumana at Hakipu'u Learning Center. We have Kyla Marie Turner. She is a graduate of the Kamehameha Schools and currently attends the University of Hawaii at Hilo. And then we have Maui Iokepo Guerrero, who is a student at St. Louis School. So these are our final ōpio, and I'm gonna open up the floor to you, Haumana. Would anyone like to go first? Go ahead, Hema. Mahalo.
Aloha. It's funny, I remember you came onto a Zoom meeting at our school not too long ago, and we got to hear you talking. That was really awesome. But my question was, I know you've been very onipa and courageous during this time and very invested into this issue. Now that the Pentagon has announced that it will defuel those two things, thank God, and that you guys were able to get, you and I believe Senator Schatz were able to get something in the tune of $450 million. I'm not sure if that's the correct estimate, but a large sum of money to do said defueling. Where are your hopes now concerning Kapūkaki and its rehabilitation?
Well, like I said earlier, it is imperative that the Department of Defense guarantee not just the obligation, but the funding for the full remediation of Kapūkaki and the aquifer that sits under this area. The Navy has not even released their investigation and their report. I have not seen it as a member of the delegation, and if I haven't seen it, then I guarantee you the people of Hawaii and Oahu have not seen it as well. So that investigation was completed back in January, and that investigation should be able to identify how much fuel and water was actually leaked into the lower access tunnel, how much of that fuel and water was accounted for, and how much was not accounted for, which subsequently drained and soaked and leached into the soil, and that made its way into the aquifer via the Red Hill shaft and what they call the infiltration tunnel, which is essentially a tunnel. It's like a straw in the earth, in the tunnel, in the bedrock that goes to the larger pool of water, millions and millions of gallons of water that sit under the island of Oahu and under this particular area. So we know that fuel is still unaccounted for, that it continues to drip and to percolate through the soil, through the bedrock, through the rock formations as we speak, and that the Pentagon and the Department of Defense must absolutely commit to seeing that the remediation of our Waiʻi and our precious water resource is completed, no matter how long it takes, and that the restoration of this Waiʻi and that promise and that guarantee by the Navy to return fresh, pure drinking water to this area, ultimately for the people of Hawaii and the island of Oahu. The Southern Basal Aquifer, which is a federally designated water resource, provides 77% of Oahu's drinking water. It is a federally designated sole source aquifer. And so it's very important that the Pentagon commit to remediating. And we don't know what the long-term effects, we don't know how long this will take. We don't know where that plume is. And so I also believe that the establishment of a water treatment facility is also important. It's also important that the Navy establish a water quality testing facility so that we're not sending water samples all the way to the mainland, which takes a while for the results to come back. That can be at the University of Hawaii or at some third-party company on Oahu, but those things need to be here on Oahu. The Board of Water Supply through Ernie Lau has already been talking about potential water shortages and the rationing of water that may need to happen in the summer because, it's going to be hot. More people use water. And if we don't have the Halava shaft or the Halava well feeding the Board of Water Supply system, if we don't have the Red Hill well feeding the Navy's water supply system, that's a significant amount of water that feeds both of those systems. And you can't pump more water than you're allowed to take. There's a yield that is allowed to pull water out of the aquifer, because if you pull too much, you will start pulling out brackish water or water that has a higher salt content. And so the Board of Water Supply is already expecting that there will be potentially a water shortage, or people will have to change their water habits over the summer when it gets hot. But these are the things that the Navy needs to work with our community on and needs to commit to. There are still hundreds, if not over 1,000 military service members still living in hotels that haven't been able to move back to their homes yet. They've been there since the first week of December. They celebrated Christmas there. They're going to be celebrating spring break there. And they're tired of being there. They want to be back in their homes. And they want the full confidence that they can use the water in their homes and that the water is safe to drink. It's safe to bathe in. It's safe to feed your feed your pets and animals that reside in our military service members' homes, and that it's safe for their families. And the Navy needs to guarantee that, working together with the interagency water team that they have, which is part of it is the EPA, the Department of Health, and the United States Navy. So those are things that we are working on with the Navy, and my staff is working on to ensure that the Navy meets that commitment. There's a lot. It's a long road ahead, and in addition to all of that, safely defuel the tanks within 12 months and permanently shut down this facility. So there's a lot of work the Navy is going to have to do. It's going to cost a lot of money. There's already, I think you are right, the initial $430 million. I think Senator Schatz reported an additional $150 or so million was included in the appropriations bill. So we're already talking $500 million that this has costed the taxpayers of our country. And I wouldn't be surprised that when it's all said and done, that this will cost over $1 billion. And that's before you even get into the long-term health issues that people may have, the lawsuits that may occur, or the service-connected disabilities that our current active duty service members that will one day become, veterans when they leave the military. The Navy and the military will be responsible for their long-term health care. And we don't know what consuming petroleum contaminated water can do for the long-term health of an individual. And so those are many, many complex issues that we need to work on, both for the short term and the long term.
Mahalo, Congressman, for that. Kind of wanted to jump off of Hama's question and a little bit about what we were talking earlier with the VI Act. So my question is, with the Pentagon's order that just went through, where does that leave the VI Act? What is kind of the next step forwards with the VI Act? Does it get amended because of the Pentagon's order? And kind of that question.
Well, that's a great question. The Red Hill VI Act, which anyone can pull up, is if you go to congress.gov and you type in HR 6714, you will pull up the Red Hill VI Act. It has been referred to the House Committee on Armed Services, which I am a member on. It was introduced on February 11th, and the Red Hill VI Act will do a bunch of different things, and I kind of mentioned what they would be doing earlier. Now, because the Navy has made a decision to permanently close the facility, it may not be necessary for this bill to move through the Congress. What would be necessary, though, is to take important parts of the VI Act and include them in the next National Defense Authorization Act, and include funding for some of those things, like a water treatment facility, like a water quality testing facility, like the reimbursement of expenses incurred by the Board of Water Supply, the Department of Education, the Department of Health. Those could be part of the next NDAA or subsequent appropriations bills. This bill was introduced prior to the Secretary of Defense's decision, because when the Pentagon made the decision to contest the state's Department of Health's legal order and to basically sue the state of Hawaii and the people of Hawaii in federal and state court, I, along with Senator Schatz and Congressman Case made a decision that we needed to introduce federal legislation. If they were not willing to do it on their own, that we would legislate it and force them to do it by an act of Congress, which is well within Congress's power to do so. I think the introduction of the VI Act was critical in the decision that Secretary Austin made to shut the facility down. It may have been the tipping point for them when the Congress was about to start to review and debate the Red Hill VI Act and potentially legislatively shut down this facility. I think the Navy looked at the bill, looked at all the other factors that were happening, and came to that decision on their own. And so this bill is still there. It is still a live bill for the entire 117 Congress, which will end at the end of this year or at the start of the 118th Congress. So in the event that the Navy doesn't, or it appears that they're not complying with that commitment, this bill can definitely move forward. There is also a companion bill in the United States Senate that Senator Schatz introduced, and that would be Senate Bill 3647, which you can also find at congress.gov. Senator Schatz introduced a companion bill to this bill in the Senate. So, and I mahalo them for, standing with me and introducing this critical piece of legislation to permanently shut down the facility. It is the first time the congressional delegation ever since, statehood had ever taken a position, a firm position, a clear position that this facility should be shut down. And I think that was a message that was taken by the Pentagon, and they took it very, very seriously, and they decided to act on their own.
Mahalo for your mana'o so far. I kind of have a intricate kind of question. There's kind of three parts to it. So what does decommissioning the fuel tanks look like and kind of mean? And how can we as Native Hawaiians hold them accountable of finishing what they've told us that they were going to do? And what's kind of the time frame estimated to the decommissioning of the fuel tanks?
That's a great question. What is decommissioning and permanently shutting down is I think could be looked at in a couple of different ways. The military often, they call it, they use the word mothball, where you take something out of operational service. You drain out the oil, you maybe take out the engines, if I'm referring to an airplane, and you mothball it, you put it into storage, you wrap it up, just in case you need to use it again. That's not what we're talking about here, because that could also be looked at as a decommissioning. This is the permanent shutdown of the facility. What does that mean? I don't know. There is a third-party assessment team that is looking, that is doing that research right now, that the Navy has contracted. Their report should be done in late April. Part of that report is how do they safely defuel this facility and do it in a safe manner. But that was already happening before the Secretary of Defense made his decision to shut the facility down. Now, the Pentagon and the military, including the Navy, need to comply with the Secretary's order, which is the permanent shutdown. And I would suspect that they would be looking at what that actually means. And part of the appropriation, the additional appropriation that was Senator Schatz announced, that was appropriated, would probably go to looking at what permanent shutdown actually means. Will they remove each tank that sits in this cavity right now, I guess you could say, is that even physically possible? Will the tanks be filled with concrete? Will they be empty? What happens if they're empty? Will they start to rust? What could that potentially do to the aquifer over the long term? So what does permanent shutdown look like? I think we're going to have to see what the Navy's answers are to that over the next few months. This facility doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, or at least in the United States. We don't know what exists in secret in other countries like China and Russia, but we know that in the United States, there's nothing like this facility. And so figuring out what permanent shutdown means is going to be a question for the Navy. You also then have miles and miles of tunnels. You have a almost 4-mile long tunnel that goes from the top of Kapūkaki all the way down to Pu'uloa at Pearl Harbor. What will happen to that tunnel system? There's a lot of remnants of the U.S. military all over the place. I mean, many of us have hiked up to the pillboxes at Lanikai, or we've gone up to Diamond Head, Mount Leahi, and there's military bunkers above Kualoa Ranch. There's stuff all over the place that are still there. The Navy and the military in many cases left them, put up doors and locked them, and that was it. So we'll have to figure out and see what permanent shutdown means. What can the Lahui do? What can our ōpio do? Well, we can continue to be that strong voice to ensure that the Navy complies with not just the state's emergency order, but also the order of the Secretary of Defense to permanently shut down this facility. And we do that through having conversations like this to continue to make your voice heard to your congressional delegation. Myself and Senator Hirono both sit on the very relevant Senate and House Armed Services Committee, where we can continue to ask these questions of the Navy and continue to put pressure on the Navy and the Pentagon. But making sure your voice is heard is really, really important. And I look forward to engaging with all of you and being your voice on this critical committee.
Mahalo nui for just sharing and updating us all with what's happening. I kind of have a few questions, but I'll limit myself to 2 of them. So the first being that now that we're listening to learning about all of this, with the Secretary's orders now being the sort of authority that's holding the Navy accountable. So now is all accountability from within the Pentagon itself, if that makes sense? Are they facilitating their own methods into shutting down this facility, and now that the VI Act isn't going through? So kind of wondering on the relationships of accountability. And then the second part is, I know you mentioned that now we're looking at moving resources to the National Defense Authorization Act. So when do we see that act being sort of, I guess, talked about in Congress? Or when do we expect it to be pushed forward, I should say?
So, as most people know, I'm in the military, and I'm still in the military, and I've been in for 21 years. I'm a pilot, Hawaii Air National Guard, United States Air Force, and I basically served my entire 21 years career at Hickam Air Force Base. So I understand the military pretty well, especially as a senior officer. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Hawaii Air National Guard in the Air Force. So I have a feeling what is happening now there at the Pentagon. When the Secretary of Defense, which is the senior military civilian member of the administration, there is no person higher than the Secretary of Defense than the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, President Biden. So when the Secretary of Defense issues an order, which he did, then the Pentagon will move heaven and earth to comply with that order. And I would suspect that that is exactly what is happening this week. The Secretary of Defense has made his order, and the officers in the Pentagon are figuring out now how to comply with that order. That's not something that you just flip a switch and it happens overnight. It's going to take a little bit of time for them to do that and be very deliberate about how to do that. But they will be, if I had to guess, working in tandem with the third-party assessment team that was already looking at how to safely defuel this facility. This other team will be looking at what permanent shutdown of the facility looked like. What has the military done in other locations like this throughout the country that they could potentially use as a model? You know, there are sites much worse than this particular site, as bad as it is, but there's like nuclear waste sites and other sites throughout the country that have some really bad contamination, and they are continuing to work on remediating those areas throughout the country where other military locations were. So, you know, that's something that I'm sure the Pentagon is looking at right now, is how do we comply with the Secretary of Defense's order, which is to defuel the facility within 12 months, basically by March of next year, and then to permanently shut down that facility. And what does it look like to secure the facility? Because this is a big facility. You know, there's a big facility with a lot of moving parts, and to secure that facility, to lock that facility down, to make sure that there's no access into the facility is going to be really important as well. In terms of the National Defense Authorization Act, that's something that the House Armed Services Committee will be working on in I'm sure the near future, like May, June timeframe. This past year, we did the NDAA very late in the calendar year. We did it, I think, in around September. Part of that reason was new administration, new president. The president's military defense budget never made it to the Congress until about May of last year. And so we didn't really start working on the NDA until the summer and early fall. And then the NDAA wasn't passed until December, right before the new year. And just because the NDA was passed, it implements language and policy and direction within the Pentagon. But any new programs or any funded programs within an NDAA still needs to be authorized by, or excuse me, appropriated by the appropriators or the appropriations committee. So the way the Congress's budget works is you have an authorizing body and an appropriating body. So I sit on the authorizing body, the House Armed Services Committee, that crafts and passes the National Defense Authorization Act, which is passed every year for like the past 60+ years. But any new programs in the NDAA, any new authorizations in the NDAA needs money. And that money comes from the appropriators, the Appropriations Committee. So in the Congress, Senator Hirono and myself sit on the respective authorizing committees, the HASC and the SASC. Senator Schatz, Congressman Case sit on the respective appropriator committee, the House Appropriations Committee, the Senate Appropriations Committee. You need both, like bread and jelly, to go together to fund the program. And so we'll be working on that very soon. I will add one of the things, and we had a hearing this past week where the Indo-PACOM commander, Admiral Aguilino, appeared before the House Armed Services Committee. Was about a 4.5-hour hearing. I believe it was on Wednesday. And the subject of Red Hill came up from multiple members, but there was something that caught my attention, and that was from the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, Mr. Rogers, who is the senior Republican on the House Armed Services Committee. They call that person the ranking member. So Chair Adam Smith is a senior Democrat on the committee. He's the chairman. And Mr. Rogers is the ranking member. He's the most senior Republican. And what he did say was that if the Navy was not able to present to the House Armed Services Committee how they would posture and distribute fuel throughout the Indo-Pacific, being that the secretary had decided to shut down this facility and permanently remove 200 million gallons of fuel in the Indo-Pacific without a plan on where to distribute that across the Pacific, that he would be introducing an amendment in this NDAA to delay the shutdown of Red Hill. And that caught my attention because, that is something obviously and clearly that I do not support. And I'm sure the people of Hawaii will not support. And that's something that we need to keep our eye on. But that's why I'm there. I'm on the House Armed Services Committee, and I'm there to keep my eye on things like this. But his message to Admiral Aguilino and the Pentagon and the Navy was, you better have a plan for fuel distribution in the Pacific if you're going to shut down Red Hill, because of the threat and some of the adversaries and rogue nations that exist in the Western Pacific. And if you don't have a plan, then he would potentially introduce an amendment to delay the permanent shutdown of the facility until the Department of the Defense is able to present a plan that the members of Congress feel was adequate for fuel distribution in the Pacific. So that's something that was said on the record in this hearing. My staff picked up on it. Of course, so did I, and we'll be on the lookout for it. So more to come on that. Good question.
Amazing, Mana'o. I just gotta touch on that. I don't know. My opinion on that one is like, I understand his concern about military wellness and preparedness, but the lives of my people matter much more than that. I feel like it. It made me kind of mad when I heard that. I was like, you value that kind of interaction, and I understand what his point was. It just made me angry. But back to my question, I just had heard. I was writing when you were talking. I had participated at the stacking of the koa in front of the headquarters of the Navy. And while we were down there, some military members decided to come and ask what we were doing, and they met up with some of the liaisons that we had. And when we told them what we were doing and why, many of them also shared sentiments about their disappointment and anxiety at the situation that they were in, and the poisoning of the water. As a Kanaka Maoli myself, I kind of saw that somewhat as like a middle ground, as like a revelation, I guess. Maybe kind of like an uncovering of other previous actions that the military has taken on this Aina that were never that positive. And now that they're the way they postured themselves, the way they carried themselves, the way they talked during the processes when we were trying to get them to cooperate with defueling and their say shady behavior when dealing with the community, kind of left a sour taste in my mouth and many others. How do you feel that their seat here, nestled in the pearl of the Pacific, as they used to say, do you think that still supports Kanaka Maoli inside of Hawaii, their position here as a military force, and how they respect or treat our Aina?
I mean, that's a great question, and I had a discussion today with one of the leaders in the U.S. Marine Corps, a 4-star general, who just about asked me the same question as well. He was previously stationed at Kaneohe Marine Corps Station. He was out in Hawaii just last week for a blessing of one of the facilities, and asked what was my thoughts on how the military could better understand Kanaka Maoli and some of the things that generations before us have carried with them, many times silent. This is a different time today. This is an awakened generation of Kanaka Maoli, of ōpio, that in many cases have learned our language. We are fluent in our language. We are, very proud and ma'a of our culture. We understand our history, that history that wasn't taught to our kupuna, wasn't taught to our makua. We're very well aware of that history, and that trauma, generational trauma, still exists throughout Hawaii, and it has been kicked down the road. It hasn't, no one has really addressed these things that have been simmering for quite some time. A situation like Red Hill just elevates an issue like this, as similar as Kaho'olawe, I'm sure it was in that time for that generation. This Red Hill, Kapūkaki, this is our generation that stood up and answered the call on this issue. I've told the military and the Indo-PACOM commander and the Marines that there needs to be better integration of culture and of history and of Kanaka Maoli, at the highest levels of the different commands that are here in Hawaii. And that they better understand not just the senior leaders that come in, but other military service members that come to Hawaii, that are excited to come to Hawaii, oftentimes for 3-4 years, and really want to learn about Hawaii and the Pacific, the military's role in the Pacific, and in some cases that dark history that still exists. I reminded, and I didn't have to remind him, he well knew the history about the United States Marines, who, at the request of Minister Stevens, supported the illegal overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1893. And it goes back, back over 100 years ago. And so the military, I think, has got the message. They need to address it a different way than they have been in the past, because you can't just call Kanaka when it's time to bless a facility, or you want an oli, or you want a pule. That's not going to cut it anymore. You need to include Kanaka in senior levels of leadership, those that are lineal descendants, those that understand and have pilina to that place, those that are lineal descendants that know that these places have names. Red Hill is, I don't know where they came up with the name Red Hill, but it's Kapūkaki, right? I don't know how they came up with Pearl Harbor. It's Pu'uloa. Even Ford Island has a traditional name, and there's traditional mo'olelo for these areas. So there are lineal descendants, cultural practitioners from all of these ahupua'a that understand the oral histories and the traditions and the protocol of these areas. And these are the people that you need to make sure they are at the table and having part of the conversations. Like you said, and those of you and others that built the ahu down there at the Pacific Fleet headquarters, I think one of the things that was very positive out of that was the Navy reached out to some of the senior leaders that were there and met with them. And I sat at the table and met with them. And they conveyed their message to the United States Navy and to the senior level members of the Pentagon. So that I continue to stress this with the military, that they have to do a much, much better job, a much different job, look at this issue through a different lens than they have been doing for years and years and years. Because I've always said the way we have done things in the past, whether it is Red Hill, Kapūkaki, Mauna Kea, Kaho'olawe, Makua, Pohakuloa, is not a blueprint for the future. And the sooner you can come to that realization, the sooner we can sit down at the table and kuka. But if you have not come to that realization yet, then it makes it very difficult for the two of us to move forward together. And that takes leadership. It takes someone who is able to walk in different worlds, wear different hats, and bring people together around these issues. You know, I'm fortunate that I have an opportunity to look at an issue through multiple different lenses that not too many people in Hawaii in my position right now have the capability to do, as a lieutenant colonel in the Hawaii National Guard that understands the military, that is a native Hawaiian, whose family comes from Miloli'i, here on Mokuokeawe. You know, that there's no one else in elected office today that has that same lens and that same opportunity to sit on multiple tables and understand complex problems and find solutions to those problems. And you know, I think that it has allowed me to be a very, very strong voice on this issue. And because of that strong voice, we are in the situation we are in today. Through the collective efforts of many and all of you, this facility will be shut down. And that is what should be done. That is the pono thing to do. And you know, we will hold the Navy accountable to that decision.
Mahalo nui no na mana'o I hapai ia and mahalo to you, Congressman Kaiali. I have a few questions, but they all kind of mesh together. So you mentioned that you've been to Kapūkaki and actually visited the site and did research as well as observed a bunch of different things that were going on. I guess my questions are, you know, what were your thoughts and how did you feel prior to visiting? How did you feel while you were visiting? And how did, you know, that motivate you or encourage you to kind of push this movement, as well as how it motivated you or how you used that to kind of encourage other colleagues of yours in, you know, pushing this movement forward and the VI Act and all of that?
You know, when you know, as Kanaka, you know, when whether you're going to someone's house or you're going to a new place, you know, the protocol is to always ask permission. You know, when you go somewhere that is not someplace that you are from, right? Whether you're asking to enter someone's home or you're in a new, you know, vahipana. And so in the previous times I had gone, especially going, and I've had the privilege now to go into some pretty incredible places throughout our Pai'aina, specifically down into, I guess you could say, groundwater wells deep into the Aina, you know, like, I don't know, hundreds of feet into the Aina on Maui or on Hawaii Island on the west side, where the water source exists, where you actually see it with your own eyes. You know, you almost feel like you're down there with Kanaloa, and this is the source of all life in the island. And I've always felt like, you know, without asking the proper permission to be there, that was something that weighed on me. And which is why on the third trip that we went, when all this was totally, you know, basically getting out of control, and it was a crisis, I really felt like we needed someone there to go with us and to bless the facility and to bless Kapūkaki and to remind us why we were all there, to put us in the right frame of mind before we went in to the tunnel system. And others that were there were there for the very first time. So I reached out to Kahu Cordell Kikoa. You know, many of you know him, and long time Kahu at Kamehameha schools, and he agreed to come. And before we went in, he brought Miley, he brought Vai, he blessed all of us. He put us in the right frame of mind. So we had the right ano, I guess you could say, before we went into the facility. And that was very important for me to do that, because that was something I had not personally done before, but I had always thought, hey, no feel right just walking inside here and going into a place that without the proper protocol. And so I'm glad you asked that question, but that's what we did. And I think for all of us that went there on that particular site visit, we went in with a different reverence for not the facility, but a different reverence for where we were. Deep in the Aina, near our vai, looking at the vai, seeing the fuel, smelling the fuel, and really feeling that kaumaha that I had felt personally in there as a Kanaka. And that, I think is something that had never been done before. The Navy had never experienced before. And, I think you gotta, somebody gotta be the alaka'i, right? Somebody gotta lead and lead by example. And I think it made an impression on the Navy that they finally began to understand that what they had been doing in the past was not the pono thing to do. And, it was the right thing to do to approach it that way. So anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, that was very powerful what you just said. So as you mentioned, you have such a unique perspective on what's happening currently at Red Hill, but I want to know, in your opinion, given the current situation the world is in right now, how much of, like, how urgent how urgent is the government kind of making it so that these fuel tanks get decommissioned? Like, how urgent are we making our situation? Because in my opinion, it's very, very vital that we get clean water. And
Sure. Well, I mean, I can tell you, being in the military and taking orders for the last 21 years, that when a senior officer, and in this case, the number one senior civilian military, secretary, orders the defueling within 12 months, that's an order. That is a order, and they will carry that out. The only thing that could supersede that order is an order from the president, right, the commander-in-chief, or legislative action by the Congress to prevent the execution of that order, which is what the ranking member was referring to, if you remember what I said earlier. I will not tolerate that, and I will do whatever I can to prevent that with the Democratic majority we have on that committee. But nevertheless, you're talking a senior most ranking member on the Republican side. And I'm, one of the lowest ranking members on the committee because I've only been there for about 14, 15 months. But at the end of the day, everybody only has one vote and everybody has, one voice. So I'm confident that the military will defuel these tanks in the next 12 months. That's the first step, is let's get the tanks defueled. There's over 100 million gallons of fuel that are in those tanks right now, tonight, as we speak. 3 of those tanks, 3, have never even been looked at, touched, or inspected in the last 39 to 41 years. That's unacceptable. If what the Navy is saying is true, and this crisis was a result of 3,000 gallons of unaccounted fuel, imagine what 100,000 gallons of unaccounted fuel would do. 1 million gallons of unaccounted fuel would do. you are talking about the permanent contamination of the majority of the east side of the island of Oahu's water resource for hundreds of years. And so defueling as quick as possible, as safely as possible, and getting that 100 million gallons of fuel out of that facility, in my mind, is the most important thing that needs to be done. Let's get the threat away from the water resource as fast as possible. We can then look at what decommissioning and permanently shutting down looks like to secure the facility. But let's get the threat away from the aquifer. And that's the 100+ million gallons of fuel that are sitting in there right now tonight and have been sitting there stagnant basically since December, early December, when the Navy stopped transferring fuel and using this facility. So we need to eliminate the threat. The threat is the fuel. We need to get the fuel out of the tanks.
Mahalo nui, Congressman. You know, we do want to honor your time. We appreciate you joining us here on this panel so that we can get your insight and engaging with our ōpio. We do have one last question, and so I want to allow Kainoa to ask his question, but I just want to mahalo you again.
Yeah, mahalo nui for taking that time. And I guess the final question really stems from a comment you made earlier that the Navy was bringing up, or some of the military officials, regarding acknowledging the dark history part of our islands. And I'm kind of curious now, so if they're already acknowledging that the history does exist, and, you know, I just call it out as it is, that there's a lot of illegalities on whose authority allows them to conduct ecocide here, then what in their minds are the next steps? And then even like addressing that even at the congressional level, with you now there too, because everything's based on that lie of Newlands resolution, right? That joint resolution, which I don't think I need to go into too much detail because it's becoming common knowledge. But yeah, so how do, I guess, even like for the Lahui question of like, how do we really address all of that, with the military now sort of acknowledging it, whether or not publicly or not? But
you know, the military is trying to answer that question as well. You know, the military is Hawaii is a strategic location for the military. It always has been, right? It is why the military, even under our mo'i, pushed to have a coal facility at Pu'uloa, right? When they were, you know, having more of a military presence in the Kingdom of Hawaii. And so it is a very strategic location for the military. We have adversaries in the Pacific that do not agree with our, in you know, many cases, democratic way of life, and pose you know, a threat to the United States of America. You know, there are people out there that do not agree with democracy, with freedom of speech, with even having this Zoom we're having tonight. You know, this wouldn't be possible in some other countries where every aspect of your life is controlled. But with that being said, you know, the military has to, you know, look at their presence in Hawaii a little differently than they have in the past. You know, having that cultural awareness is very important amongst our military leaders, especially when new leaders come in. You know, one of the advantages of the National Guard, Army or Air, is that we're here. You know, we are embedded. We're your brothers, your sisters, your uncles, your aunties. You know, we're born here, we're going to die here, and we serve our entire careers here. But that's not the case for active duty service members that come to Hawaii for you know, 3-4 years. They leave, sometimes they come back. So having continuity among military members is really, really important. All of us, yourself included, have that opportunity to help educate the military and our military service members that, in the conversations I've had with them, really want to hear ho'olohe, listen and understand some of the things that we're talking about tonight. It's not part of their welcome brief when they get. I think it should be. And that's one of the things that I have advocated to the highest levels of the Indo-PACOM leadership, and I advocated it today. So we can do that together. We can take that opportunity and continue to build on that. You know, in many cases, the ahu that was built outside Pacific Fleet headquarters is a constant daily reminder to the senior leaders of the Navy, Admiral Paparo himself, who arrives at that gate every day and looks at that ahu. And having spoken to him on multiple occasions, he wants to do that, and he's very, very open to do that, and has had conversations with other Kanaka leaders, you know, throughout our lahui, that make sure that their voices are being heard. But there are many issues that exist throughout Hawaii. We have important leases that will be expiring within the next decade throughout Hawaii. We have, you know, at least a half, if not 3/4 of the island of Kaho'olawe that still has unexploded ordnance and has never been properly remediated. That's unacceptable. You know, that is something that needs to be addressed. And there's many other areas throughout Hawaii that in many cases are still like Kaho'olawe, where there's unexploded ordnance, whether it's Maku'u, you know, down in South Kona, Waikoloa, and other places, of course, Makua Valley, and all of these areas need to be addressed. And it's going to take a lot of time, effort, and a collective voice from all of us to do that.
Mahalo nui again, Congressman Kaiali Kahele, for taking the time to be with us, engaging with our ōpio, engaging with our kaiaulu. We've had many people just sending lots of warm comments on Facebook throughout the different pages that we're cross-shared on. So mahalo nui, and also mahalo to our various ōpio who have joined us today. Mahalo, mahalo, mahalo. We also want to thank our sponsors, Kanaeokana as well as Kono, for putting this together. Please follow them on social media, as they're going to be announcing more events like this in the upcoming weeks. So from wherever you are in the Pai Aina or across the ocean, mahalo nui ya oko pākahia pau, and aloha.
Aloha. Mahalo.